Heart disease still kills more people every year than anything else on the planet. Not accidents, not infections, not even aging alone. And what makes this so painful isn't just the number. It's how much of it is preventable. Before we go any further, let me be clear. This is not fear-mongering. The last thing I ever want is to scare anyone. But I won't pretend I'm not deeply concerned, because I see how casually this topic is treated, how often it's misunderstood, and how quietly it keeps stealing years from people who never saw it coming. Heart disease isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly through everyday habits that feel normal, harmless, even comforting. And that's what makes this conversation so important. There's something sitting in kitchens across the world right now. It's poured into drinks, mixed into sauces, baked into snacks, and hidden inside foods people genuinely believe are healthy. Most people don't notice it because it doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't feel dangerous. But over time, it quietly shifts the body toward inflammation, metabolic strain, and damage to blood vessels. I've seen how people react when they finally understand this. There's usually surprise first, then disbelief, and then clarity. Because once you see how it works, it becomes impossible to ignore. Today isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. Because awareness changes choices, and choices change outcomes. Let's start with the foods where exposure happens most often. The first food is flavored yogurt. I know it feels like a smart choice. It's marketed as healthy, packed with probiotics, and often promoted as a balanced breakfast. But many flavored versions contain large amounts of added sugar to improve taste after fat is reduced. When that sugar hits the bloodstream quickly, insulin rises sharply. Over time, repeated spikes can push the body toward insulin resistance, which increases cardiovascular strain. Choosing plain yogurt and adding whole fruit instead dramatically changes the metabolic response. The second food is fruit juice. It feels natural because it comes from fruit, but the absence of fiber changes everything. Without fiber to slow absorption, the sugar enters the bloodstream rapidly, creating a spike that the body has to work hard to manage. Whole fruit behaves very differently, because digestion is slower and the glucose release is steadier. The third food is breakfast cereals. Many people start their day with them believing they're fueling their body well. But even cereals labeled whole grain often contain multiple forms of added sugar. Starting the day with a large glucose spike sets the tone for energy crashes, hunger swings, and increased stress on blood vessels. The fourth food is granola and snack bars. They're convenient, portable, and often marketed as energy foods. But many are held together with syrups and concentrated sweeteners that deliver sugar quickly. What looks like a healthy snack can act more like a dessert metabolically. The fifth food is flavored plant milks. Almond, oat, soy, and coconut varieties can be excellent choices when unsweetened. But flavored versions often contain significant added sugar that people don't account for, especially when used daily in coffee or cereal. The sixth food is packaged breads. Bread itself isn't the issue. The problem is that many commercial varieties contain added sugar to enhance flavor and shelf life. Because bread is eaten frequently, even small amounts accumulate throughout the day. The seventh food is salad dressings and low-fat sauces. This is where people are often genuinely surprised. When fat is removed to lower calories, manufacturers frequently replace flavor with sugar. A few tablespoons can add up quickly without anyone realizing it. The eighth food is energy drinks and sweetened beverages. Liquid sugar is absorbed faster than solid food, leading to sharper spikes and greater metabolic stress. Regular consumption is strongly associated with higher triglycerides and increased cardiovascular risk. The ninth food is sweetened breakfast pastries and baked snacks. These combine refined flour and sugar, creating rapid absorption that challenges insulin regulation and promotes inflammation. The 10th food is sweetened coffee and tea drinks. Many people don't think of these as desserts, but syrups and sweeteners can turn a simple drink into a major source of added sugar consumed daily. Now here's why all of this matters beyond calories or weight. The cardiovascular system responds to repeated sugar exposure in several ways at once. Triglycerides rise, increasing the likelihood of plaque buildup in arteries. HDL cholesterol, which helps clear excess fats, often decreases. Insulin resistance develops, forcing the pancreas to work harder and raising blood pressure over time. Glycation stiffens blood vessels, making them less flexible and forcing the heart to pump harder to maintain circulation. Chronic inflammation weakens plaque stability, increasing the risk of rupture, which can lead to heart attack or stroke. This process isn't dramatic, it's gradual. And that's why people don't notice until much later. But here's where perspective becomes powerful. According to the World Health Organization, cardiovascular diseases, CVDs, are the leading cause of death globally. That statement alone should make us pause, not in fear, but in awareness. The same report explains that an estimated 19.8 million people died from CVDs in 2022, representing approximately 32% of all global deaths. Of these deaths, 85% were due to heart attack and stroke. Numbers like these aren't meant to alarm us. They're meant to remind us how important everyday habits really are. What's even more striking is that over 3/4 of these deaths occur in low and middle-income countries, showing that this isn't just about genetics. It's about lifestyle patterns that can be changed. And that brings us to something hopeful. Most cardiovascular diseases can be prevented by addressing behavioral and environmental risk factors, especially diet. Small, consistent changes in what we eat can create measurable improvements in blood pressure, cholesterol, and metabolic health. Now, let's talk about what happens inside the body when exposure decreases. Because this is where the story shifts from concern to empowerment. When people begin reducing added sugar exposure, the body often responds faster than they expect. Within weeks, triglyceride levels can begin to fall, insulin sensitivity can improve, and energy levels often feel more stable throughout the day. Hunger becomes more predictable instead of urgent. Sleep can feel deeper. These aren't dramatic overnight transformations, but they're real physiological shifts that reflect reduced metabolic stress. I've watched people experience this shift and describe it as feeling like their body is finally working with them instead of against them. That's because the cardiovascular system thrives on stability. It doesn't need extreme diets or perfect routines. It responds best to consistent patterns that reduce unnecessary strain. To understand why this matters so much, it helps to see the bigger picture of what cardiovascular disease actually includes. It isn't just heart attacks. It's a group of disorders affecting the heart and blood vessels, including coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, which affects blood flow to the brain, peripheral arterial disease that impacts circulation in the limbs, and conditions involving blood clots that can travel to the lungs. Seeing it as a spectrum helps us understand why daily habits influence so many different outcomes. The encouraging part is that risk isn't fixed. The same global health data shows that most cardiovascular diseases can be prevented by addressing behavioral factors like unhealthy diet patterns, physical inactivity, and excess sugar intake. That means everyday choices truly matter. Another insight that often gets overlooked is how early detection changes outcomes. The guidance emphasizes that it is important to detect cardiovascular disease as early as possible, so that management with counseling and medicines can begin. Awareness doesn't just help prevention. It helps people act sooner when something feels off. And this brings us back to something simple but powerful. The body is incredibly responsive when we reduce constant metabolic pressure. Blood vessels can regain some flexibility. Inflammatory markers can decrease. Blood pressure regulation can become more stable. These changes don't require perfection, only direction. One of the most effective shifts is focusing on whole foods more often than packaged ones. Foods that look close to how they came from nature tend to have slower absorption patterns, more fiber, and fewer hidden sugars. This naturally reduces glucose spikes without needing strict rules. Another shift is becoming label-aware, not label-obsessed. Just understanding where sugar tends to hide allows people to make small adjustments that add up over weeks and months. Even swapping sweetened drinks for water or unsweetened options can significantly reduce daily exposure. What I find most powerful is how quickly taste preferences adapt. When sugar intake drops, the brain's reward pathways recalibrate. Foods that once tasted normal can start to feel overly sweet, and natural flavors become more noticeable. This isn't willpower. It's neurobiology adjusting to a new baseline. Consistency matters more than intensity, because the cardiovascular system responds to patterns. A steady reduction in added sugar reduces repeated insulin spikes, lowers triglyceride production in the liver, and decreases the inflammatory signals that contribute to plaque instability. And this is where the emotional side of the conversation matters. I've seen how people blame themselves when health issues appear, believing they did something wrong. But most of the time, it's not about one decision. It's about patterns that felt normal, because everyone around them was doing the same thing. That's why awareness is so powerful. It removes blame and replaces it with understanding. When people understand what's happening beneath the surface, they don't need fear to motivate change. They just need clarity. The truth is, the heart is remarkably resilient. It works continuously, adapting to the demands placed on it every single day. When those demands become more balanced, it responds by functioning more efficiently. That's why even modest improvements in diet can have measurable effects on cardiovascular risk over time. If there's one perspective to hold on to, it's that health isn't built in dramatic moments. It's built in small daily choices repeated consistently. Reducing hidden sugars, choosing whole foods more often, and staying aware of how the body responds can shift long-term outcomes more than most people realize. And I want to end where we began, with clarity rather than fear. This conversation isn't about eliminating joy from food or creating anxiety around eating. It's about removing the hidden pressures that quietly accumulate when we aren't aware of them. Because once you see clearly how everyday exposure shapes long-term health, you gain something incredibly valuable: the ability to choose differently without feeling restricted. The heart doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for balance. And when we give it that, It responds with resilience that can last for decades. Clarity creates better choices. Better choices create better outcomes. And that's where real confidence in your health begins.